welcome back to What the Hype, where this week we're talking about...
There's something lurking behind the corner or under your bed. What is it? It's Spooky Season.
Oh, wow, Eric, you really brought the energy. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I'm actually suffering from a cough right now, so I tried to do my best Vincent Price while still holding it together. Like creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize your neighborhood.
To be honest, I would say that was successful because Vincent Price was exactly who I thought of when you did that
Of course,
voice.
classic.
So well
it does
done.
not get better. And also with us on this evening's entertainments and delights, Micah Tannenbaum.
That was great.
Also, thank you for being the sacrificial lamb right before we started this recording. Of course, this week, if you haven't seen from the title, we're going to be talking about Halloween movies and getting into what kinds of scary movies really appeal to us and ultimately what is at the heart and at the root of scary movies and why they exist. And when I realized Eric was sick and had a little bit of a crackly voice, I was like, hey, great idea. Why don't you use that crackly voice to our advantage? Before we get started, please make sure you're following us on social media and your favorite podcast app. Just search for What the Hype Podcast and see full video episodes on YouTube. So to kind of warm us up today, to get us primed for some of these spooky conversations, I wanted to ask everyone on the panel, what was the first movie that scared us? And as a secondary part of this question, do we like to be scared?
Can anyone like to be scared, Laura?
I think in a safe environment, you can enjoy the rush that comes with a good scare.
It seems almost like the emotions are opposites to me. I too will sit in a chair and deliberately turn on a movie from the horror genre. I have been known to do that. But I can't say I enjoy them so much because the whole point, I think there's this vulnerability, and I think the best movies leave me unable to sleep afterwards, which is also not a pleasant feeling, but it is, I think, a rite of passage. It's something that we should commemorate for its infrequency, I guess. Once a year is enough. Once a year there's a good amount of time to we're going to focus on feeling uncomfortable and not safe, which actually I feel year round, but in this context.
Aren't excitement and fear two opposite ends of the same spectrum?
Are they?
What your body experiences is essentially the same adrenaline rush. It's just how you associate with it.
Yep. Increase of heart rate. I can't say I've ever had goosebumps when I've been happy about something, but that's okay.
You've never been so happy or excited about something that you got goosebumps? I definitely have.
Oh, did I just tell on myself there that I haven't been properly excited in my life?
No, I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have.
No. Well, I don't recognize all of the same physical signs as the two, but I think you're onto something, Micah, for sure. There is a case to be made for it. I think roller coasters, which could be its own episode. There is some level of
Flight of the Hippogriff scares the hell out of me.
I know. But also, you're not just talking about the animatronics, right? You're talking about the actual...
No, the actual ride. Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure, I was fine. Flight of the Hippogriff, it may just be the movements and the fact that it's for kids. I'm really not doing a great job.
But so that is the bridge then between
right
excitement and twists and turns and it's kind of like being on a roller coaster.
Yeah. I also think there's an element of maybe realism that comes in with Flight of the Hippogriff because there are no animatronics. There's nothing decorative. It's a very basic old school roller coaster that is very twisty and turny. And it can kind of feel like to your body, probably this could go off the rails at any moment.
Right.
So I understand.
Will it or won't? Will I or won't I die in the next 2 minutes? Question.
Yeah, it's just the thrills we all seek. Like, am I going to die? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe. I still remember, though, the circumstances surrounding the first scary movie that I saw, and it was The Exorcist. The babysitter who lived across the street, his name was Brandon, and he watched my sister and I. We would always, when he was watching us, due to the parents being out, go to his place, pick out DVDs. I picked out The Exorcist one night. He and my sister were going to watch a movie in the living room, and I watched it on my computer. You guys remember DVD-ROM?
Oh, yeah.
So we had a DVD drive in my computer.
I remember
cutting
VHS.
Edge. Yeah, well, this was cutting edge technology. So I sat with my headphones in at the same computer that I used to like update the caption contest on and stuff, and watched The Exorcist. And it wasn't until after midnight when the movie finished that I realized that day was Friday, the 13th of the month.
Ooh.
The Exorcist is one of the most widely regarded and truly scariest movies of all time. So I'm grateful that my first real horror film was so well acclaimed and in good, considered the upper echelon. But I was scared. I think I actually didn't sleep that night, especially because I had not intended to watch a horror movie on Friday the 13th.
Yeah, it seems like a bad omen.
Well, for me, I remember as a kid watching It. And this was the It played by Tim Curry, who honestly is not even recognizable in that role as Pennywise. But I just growing up, and we're going to talk probably about this a little bit later on, I had a fear of clowns. And so for seeing this clown as the main character, the main villain, the scary boogeyman, I was at a friend's birthday who was doing a sleepover, and we're watching all of these horror movies. And I remember It came on, and after that, all bets were off. Like it went to Pet Cemetery, which I could deal with, but I just couldn't go back to sleep, or I couldn't go to sleep in the first place. So I ended up staying up the entire night, went to my friend's father, who called my dad, eventually came and picked me up, and it was one of those experiences. And it just goes to show you, like in the early 90s, I was just 10 years old, 12 years old. So it definitely got to me. And then another really quick story, I had a good friend who lived around the corner, and kind of as teenagers, we'd watch movies, and I remember distinctly watching a lot of horror movies over at his house. But in particular, he introduced me to the Halloween series. Ooh. And, I don't even know how many of them exist today.
Too many.
I remember the original, and then of course the few that came after it. But because he lived so close, I would always walk home. And, I didn't necessarily live in the Midwest suburbs like Haddonfield, but it was close enough where, it's quiet at night. There aren't a lot of cars driving down the street, especially if you're watching in the fall and, the leaves are rustling and you're close to Halloween. You get a little scared walking home. And so you're looking over your shoulder, trying to make sure that Michael Myers isn't about to
the music plays,
hack you to pieces. So
yeah,
I just
that aggressive synth.
I remember distinctly.
That's such a word for it. Aggressive synth.
Walking down the middle of the street, like not even on the sidewalks. Like I was so terrified that somebody was going to pop out of the bushes, or
right.
It just shows you what it does to your psyche, like how it plays with your mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. This feeling of being unsafe, best when in a safe environment to feel unsafe. But sometimes it goes too far. And that story of you being a young kid and having to have your dad come pick you up, I think we all relate. I think we all have that story, because here's a circumstance where the kids, who are sleeping over are introducing you to this thing, but nobody knows really if they can take it or not until it turns out they can't. You're going to see that thing that's going to be too spooky or too concerning or too violent. And especially as a kid, when things just happen to you, you don't know in advance. You can't really predict that kind of a thing.
Totally.
Yeah. And Micah, you're not alone. I think a lot of kids, and not even just kids, are very creeped out by clowns in general. And Tim Curry's Pennywise was no exception to that rule. As a matter of fact, it scared the living daylights out of my brother. Like, he used to have nightmares about Pennywise the clown. So, yeah, very familiar with the fact that it's super scary for people. I think the first movie I can really think of as something that scared me was The Sixth Sense. I saw that when I was about 10. And it was funny because that wasn't the first scary movie I ever saw. I've always loved scary stories. I like scary books and movies and games and all of the above. But I think the thing about The Sixth Sense was I was really able to put myself in the main character Cole's shoes because he was a little kid like me. And he was kind of like awkward and weird. And I connected with that because I felt awkward and weird. And he was having these terrifying things happen to him. So I remember distinctly that for days after I saw The Sixth Sense, when I would be going to go to bed at night, I would take a running leap from my doorway to get into my bed so that I wouldn't have to stand by my bed because I was terrified that that little girl from the movie was going to be under there and reach out and grab me like she does in the movie.
Oh my God. And The Sixth Sense is so good at those jump scares because otherwise it plays it totally, it's just like a slow build. But the thing that I always go back to from that movie is the adults hanging when he's in the school or something. You're like, the corridor is completely clear, but you see him look and then it shows them hanging. And I'm like, oh my God, like what if they're really there? It was crazy.
That's why beds that have storage underneath are much better. Than just the open space.
If you have a drawer and you open the drawer and the girl's in there, okay, joke's on, that's on me. But still, get the drawers.
And
honestly, I think Micah and Eric, y'all just might have made me realize something about myself because ever since I reached a point in life where I was buying my own furniture, I always buy beds with storage under them. I do
have to.
I don't
Vertical
buy
storage
beds.
is so hard to come by. It's just a economic solution in inflation in today's environment.
But honestly, beds that have an under area where something could theoretically be make me so uncomfortable. So maybe this is why. Thanks, M. Night Shyamalan.
Well, it is one less place to hide yourself if, something happens and a burglar
That's
comes
true.
in or something.
Yeah.
And Laura, I do like how you brought up The Sixth Sense because I remember seeing that movie for the first time and without giving away the ending, I was not expecting the ending at all. And we're talking about goosebumps. The goosebumps I got had goosebumps on goosebumps on goosebumps at the end of that movie. I was really blown away by it when I first saw it.
Same. And I think that that's one of the things we'll probably find as we're having this discussion today is what is the point of scary stories? And we're going to get into that in a moment, but we are going to quickly speak about some history behind scary movies. So we're going to go all the way back to 1896 when the first horror movie is recorded. It's a 3.5 minute short by George Méliès. I never know if I'm saying French names right, so forgive me. Méliès, I think it is, called Les Manoirs du Diable, which is in English called The Haunted Castle. And this short features many of the aesthetics and tropes that we would all recognize in scary movies today. Things like ghostly apparitions, skeletons, bats, cauldrons, the works. But as a matter of fact, many early horror modern classics drew inspiration from literature. So the 1931 Frankenstein movie with Boris Karloff as the monster was, of course, based on Mary Shelley's 1818 novel. Another notable example is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was originally published in 1886 and later adapted to a stage production, which was then adapted to a movie in 1920. So the development of horror as a genre has, it really has its roots in literature, and many of those influences still hold true today. I think we're going to see that over the course of the discussion. And we are going to speak more about literary horror in a second. But first, I wanted to ask the two of you, what is the point of telling a scary story?
I think it's ultimately a commentary on us in some way. Obviously, it's art that's made for people. I also think the medium of film specifically is really, really, really good for horror because you can point the audience exactly where you want them to look. They're all looking at their, screen, and you can show them or not show them. You have a great degree of control over that. And so I think for me, when I think of horror and like who it's for, what it's about, is like, I think it's supposed to mean something about how we live our lives and how, if we're kind to each other and, that kind of a thing.
I think it's meant to expand the mind and to challenge us to think that there's more than just what we can see in front of us, especially with certain types of horror films. And it, it always leaves you, good horror movies, I think, always leave you thinking at the end. Could this have actually happened? Could this be true? Is this happening somewhere out there? And
I love that.
That is what I really enjoy about it.
Yes, Micah, it's happening next door. Yeah. But
no, it's happening in the bushes while you're walking down the street.
Those aren't really crickets.
There's a societal aspect where I don't think horror would be as successful if it weren't the people. Like it's how we interact with others. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen any of the slasher films, and you're like, how would I react in this situation? Would I be the person who's bitten by a zombie and doesn't tell anyone? Or would I come up front and then maybe not make it to the end of the film? What exactly, how would this net out? It's just like it's a commentary on social things.
I do love that. Like the idea that as soon as fear is introduced to the mix, like fear and an amount of like dread and like worst possible outcomes, it's like the social contract goes out the window. And
right.
people are just like reverted to like their base animalistic lizard brains.
Well, and if you go to like the original there's only like 3 stories: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself.
Right.
It's the it's that versing yourself. It's you may think you know who you are, but you don't know who you are till you're being chased, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It also plays on human emotion too, because a lot of times you start to become sympathetic towards certain characters, and those characters may actually be the ones that are perpetrating the evil. So I think that there's that aspect of it too that comes into play in horror films.
You liked Stu and Billy also in Scream? Because I did. Yeah.
Right. And they set that up on purpose.
Usually, if there's some type of haunting that is taking place, there's some sort of tragedy that occurred previously that led to that haunting, that led to that type of situation. And usually, not in all cases, but in many, when you find out the story behind it, like a lot of times the lead character is assisting that individual in kind of resolving some sort of past situation.
It does seem like, going back to what you were saying too about it's meant to teach us, meant to make us think get new information. I think that's inextricably tied to this propensity for a twist. There's like they're gonna set expectations but you should expect those expectations to change midway through the film, or by like films with I think when you get into like sequelitis, films ending on a cliffhanger, some have been really underwhelming and others have been remarkable. Some have been the best, horror movie twists of all time. And that constant guessing of we don't know what's in the bushes, or we don't know if we really stopped the ghosts, or we don't know if we really stopped the bad guy, plays on our natural fear of the unknown and that which is outside of our control.
Yeah, honestly, both of you knocked it out of the park. There's obviously like no right or wrong answer to this question, because honestly, the point of something scary is going to be a little bit different to everyone. But both of you really touched on things that go back to the literary traditions that we're going to speak about here in just a moment. But I do need to step away and make sure that I have plenty of Halloween candy, not because I'm going to get any trick-or-treaters. Unfortunately, we don't have any here, but I mean for myself. So let me go check on that, and we'll be back after this break. We cannot discuss horror as a genre without talking about Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. This is going back even further. So this was published in 1764, and it is widely known as the first ever Gothic novel. Gothic fiction has flourished since then and branched off into many popular subgenres. And what differentiates Gothic from traditional horror is like the creeping sense of dread and foreboding that the Gothic inspires. A Gothic world is basically somewhere where something is already wrong. So Walpole's story was based on a nightmare that he had after a good friend of his was arrested for criticizing King George III. What's important to know here is that Walpole was actually a member of Parliament of the Whig Party during this time. After his good friend was arrested, his cousin was actually demoted in the military for doing the same thing. And Walpole is inspired to write The Castle of Otranto after this nightmare that he has, in which he saw a ghost that featured a gigantic hand in armor. So this really inspires the beginning of The Castle of Otranto. So ultimately, this story was really inspired by a lot of Walpole's concerns about governmental rule at the time. As I said, he was a member of the Whig Party, and he was a little bit on an island in Parliament because he neither wanted a pure monarchy, nor did he want to burn the whole government down and start over. He wanted a constitutional monarchy. He also had concerns about paternity and its linkage to political power, as well as inheritance laws. And these are all themes in The Castle of Otranto, which centers around an aristocratic family in medieval Italy and just how rotten they are from the inside out. The thing that's so interesting about this story, though, is that Walpole originally published this under a pseudonym. He also wrote a foreword for it that claimed that it was a medieval Italian transcript that had been found recently and had been translated.
Wait a minute. This is the beginning of the Blair Witch Project.
And I mean, there's this is all, of course, very high level. Someone who is very well studied on the history of this is probably going to pick out some of my details here and be like, you missed this. Yeah. Don't come at me. I'm going very high level here. But essentially, this is someone who's a member of Parliament who clearly has issues with the king at the time, who is then writing a story about the dangers of inheritance of power based on who your daddy is. And he doesn't want to publish that under his name. Very interesting.
I
so
wouldn't either. I mean,
No.
Right, yeah.
given the times.
So all of that is to say the roots of the Gothic genre and what really goes on to inspire the horror that we recognize today is rooted in social commentary and the human experience, and lifting that mirror up and making us look at ourselves, especially the parts of ourselves we would least like to acknowledge.
I think that's something Mike Flanagan does real well
Yes.
with his horror anthologies. Is a lot of those, not only are they all ensemble cast, but he deals with a lot of families and family trauma and who can hurt us more than the ones we're closest to kind of question. So if you mix people who know each other, care about each other, can get to each other in a world that's already gone wrong because it's Gothic, you get a recipe for classic horror.
I think looking through some of the examples that you have here, it is very clear that, where horror's origins come from. But I was also thinking about, having taken a recent trip to Scotland, so much of the history is entwined with hauntings, right? All these castles that you go to, there's these stories about how this family member or that family member or this politician or that politician still haunts the grounds, or is, heard at night screaming from inside the walls where they were, boarded up. And so that was just something that came to mind as you were going through this story.
Yeah, well, and that's why so often when you see, like, even still today, modern representations of a Gothic setting, they're often taking place in a castle or in a really, really old house, right? Because those places that tend to be a little ghosty.
Well, there's that classic question. I mean, I love modern discourse and meme culture as it pertains to horror because it makes me feel a little safer. If I'm scared, I'll just go look up memes and stuff. But like, there's this very real question of why aren't there any ghosts with modern clothing? Like, why did all the ghosts that there are die 300 years ago and are still haunting an upstairs window, on the third night of every, full moon? Where are the ghosts that have like ghost iPods and, SpongeBob t-shirts? Like where where is that?
I guess they don't have unfinished business. I guess they're like, no, you know what? I've had enough of this. I don't need to hang around here.
Out of my life. I got plenty of screen time. Yeah.
But yeah, all of that is to say, the Castle of Otranto is really what kicks off the literary genre of the Gothic and horror, Gothic horror, dark romantics, all of these things that really get extremely popular in the 18th and 19th century.
I was going to say, that was 120 years before probably the oldest Gothic novel I read, which is Turn of the Screw, Henry James.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know that it's super commonly known. Like, honestly, all credit to Dr. Kocher, who was my English advisor when I was an undergrad. He taught amazing horror seminars, and I would not know about any of this if it weren't for him. So I'm glad that I was able to retain some level of that knowledge to bring to this conversation. But I think it's really important to set the table for when we talk about why are these types of stories important. And we pulled some examples that we can talk about here for a couple of minutes of modern day scary movies that actually have deeper messages. It's not just about the jump scare. It's not just about the creepy environment and aesthetic. One movie that came to mind immediately for me was The Babadook. Have y'all seen that?
That's one that got so scary, I turned it off.
It was very scary.
She kept seeing the Babadook everywhere, and I was like, nope. I actually put it on like really high speed on my VLC player and tried to still catch the end, but I had to turn it off. Unfortunately, I'm not proud of it.
I have not seen it.
Honestly, no, Micah, I think you would love it. Australian film. it's all about grief and trauma, right? That is the ultimate message of the film. And I'm not saying how that goes one way or another, but that is at the core of that story. Even Night of the Living Dead, something that I think everyone is really familiar with. And I think is also a concept that at this point in time comes across a little bit campy, but really that was all about how America will destroy itself from the inside out, which, like, we have an election coming up in 2 weeks, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, George Romero could not have predicted the death of the third Spaces, but everything else is still very valid.
Yeah. Any Alien fans here?
Huge.
Aliens. Yeah.
Big, for sure. Yeah. That one, shocks me because it's kind of maybe in between genres, or at least as a series, it's multiple genres. The first film is very much horror. There's some body horror in it, which resonates through the rest of the franchise. But the first film is just very crushing and very, everyone is isolated. It is a horror movie. It doesn't need to be taking place in space. It could literally be anywhere else. And if you take Alien and put it not in space, you have The Thing, or, anything like that. So, however, the reason we're singling out Alien, and Laura, I agree with this, is it's very much a commentary on capitalism. These people are there because the corporation, which owns everything and is a big SpaceX type organization that can afford to send things out in space, owns these people that are going, and they are bound and obligated to explore a distress call. And they would not be there otherwise, except they want to get paid because they need to get paid. And it turns out corporation is not so innocent in realizing or in what their motives were from day one. So very relevant.
Yeah. And I think you raised such a good point about setting and how horror really can be present no matter the setting. Like, I would consider Alien to be sci-fi horror. And I think when people think like, oh, I'm watching a movie and there aren't things that go bump in the night, there aren't ghosts, there aren't like murderers, it's not a slasher movie, like it's not horror. But to be honest with you, I think there are horror elements to the first Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah.
That is absolutely
the first 5 minutes is terrifying.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a horror to like humans trying to take control of something that is not theirs to control, which is evolution.
That's Frankenstein, right? Too.
Yeah,
that could,
exactly.
It's absolutely the meddling with forces you can't understand or possibly control. The Jeff Goldblum character in Jurassic Park, a chaos statistician or whatever he calls himself, the idea that you will inevitably fail to keep control over anything as a result of probabilities and statistics is the greatest horror truth, I think, of all time. One day we will cease being able to control things because we will die.
Well, Planet of the Apes falls into that category too.
Sure.
I think so too. That's a harrowing sci-fi with a wonderful cliffhanger.
Another one that came to mind too that has nothing to do probably with social commentary, but Jaws. That movie scared the hell out of me. I live 3 blocks away from the beach. So, I thought,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know. It's a terrible problem to have.
It must be awful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is fear and there is horror in the idea of being isolated somewhere where you're helpless and there's a monster chasing you, but you can't see it. You don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah. You're not stronger than it.
Right.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it's so overpowering. I mean, that's the whole thing about Mike Myers, like you can shoot him, you can stab him, he just doesn't die, and then he keeps on coming back.
Well, but maybe there is a bit of a social commentary on it too, is because we always have this perception that, because we evolved, we're the higher species, but put us in the environment of a great white shark, we are no longer the dominant species. And I think that's part of the message of that movie.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Any others that we want to call out? I think, Eric, you might have had another one here.
Yeah, there's two that come to mind. Definitely Candyman. And I haven't seen the most recent iteration of it, but the original is very classic, very much a commentary on racism, classism. It's very harrowing, and the story behind how Candyman became Candyman is something that could very really happen, and has in America.
Yeah.
So that one's tough. The one that I think of more recently that I can remember when it was coming out, people being like, this has a message. How cool is it to have a horror film that's not just there to scare you, but it has a message? And it's when you realize that the creature in It Follows is kind of a perfect metaphor for sexually transmitted diseases, and how if you sleep with somebody, it will always potentially follow you, or there are life-changing, life-altering consequences to every little interaction that you may otherwise take for granted. So,
you know what? So first of all, I love It Follows. Like, so many John Carpenter vibes in that movie. Such a good movie.
Well, I
But
haven't
it's,
watched it. If you can imagine why.
you should.
Yeah.
You absolutely should.
It
I
is.
think you would
Yeah.
get a kick out of it because it's not it's not gory. It's not
No.
showing your face violence. Like, it's very just, this thing will chase you, but it walks. It walks everywhere.
Yeah. But it's so funny because I actually saw that movie in theaters. And I
Nice.
remember after it ended, I turned to the person who was there with me, and I was like, so that movie was about herpes. But
I mean, a tale for our age.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think the horror of it was that, because honestly, like, no one deserves to contract an STD, right? And so
Right.
I think the point of it was, there are sometimes when there are consequences for, actions that aren't fair.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah.
and that thing, what will we do to shirk responsibility when pressed?
Yeah.
A lot of the bad things that happen to even just the main character in the beginning of the film happen because somebody else is trying to get away from their actions. And that is just, we see that all day in life.
Well, what are some of our must watches during spooky season, during this time of year?
Yeah, so I have my buddy Andrew Walker and I do a yearly Halloween movie fest, which is responsible for getting me into movies I would otherwise completely overlook. And I just wanted to mention some recent ones I've seen that I've really liked. There's a horror film set over Zoom called Host that came out in 2020.
Oh.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
I've heard of it,
it's
but
so
is it
good.
good?
Yes, it actually is good. I'm only recommending ones I think are actually like good. There's one it's recent. I think it's 2022 called The Night House. Another one is an Irish film called Caveat from 2020. And I actually recently saw the Vince Vaughn slasher comedy Freaky, which I enjoyed. It's a bit of a take. It's kind of more like Freaky Friday ish vibes. But yeah, these are the good ones. And there are some classics I always go back to this time of year, namely Hocus Pocus and Casper.
I'm pretty
Oh.
sure Hocus Pocus is on every night from October 1st to October 31st on some station somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like It's a Wonderful Life, but in October and not December.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, Hocus Pocus, I'll always turn it on. Just if I'm looking for something to watch as I go to sleep. It's not a scare you out of your seat movie by any stretch, but that's actually what I like about a lot of these movies is they do run the gamut from lighthearted to make you want to poop your pants in some cases. So
yeah.
We talked about Halloween earlier. One of the other more lighthearted, it's The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. If you've never seen it, it is a great movie to watch around Halloween. Hotel Transylvania is a fun one. I always enjoy watching that. And speaking of comedies, The Addams Family. I don't think we talked a lot about comedic horror, but The Addams Family, the original, definitely is one that I always enjoy watching. Has such a great cast.
Yeah.
And then in terms of scary, and this is a movie that definitely has scared me while watching it in the last couple of years, was The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Those types of, you just never know when the scare is coming, are the ones that always get me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Anytime they're setting up for a potential scare, but then they don't do it. Like I'm thinking of Longlegs. I don't know if either of y'all have seen that.
I've seen
there
it.
are so many shots in that movie where the camera is in front of the protagonist and she is sitting in front of an open doorway.
Oh, no.
And every single time when we were watching this, me and Mark were like, someone's going to pop up behind her through that doorway. And every time it would not happen, we just felt the dread mounting because we knew eventually something was going to happen, you know?
No, protagonist facing the camera, I can't handle that.
Yeah.
It's like, what do they see?
Yeah, like whether it's a mirror, whether it's while they're driving, like if it's in the rear view mirror, the side view mirror, or in a window. It's just very creepy.
I do like how it's updated with technology. So like, the one about horror over Zoom, for instance, and there's ones Hell House LLC, where there's like all these cameras set up and it's a haunted house and they get people to go, but it's actually haunted and they're not expecting it. Found footage horror films, Paranormal Activity. I've seen at least the first 5 Paranormal Activities, and they're all very actually good. What I love about it is I think it's the third one is set in the 80s, and instead of webcams, it's old like a VHS on an oscillating fan thing. It's like they found a way to stay true to the franchise, but set it 20 years earlier, and it still works.
Oop.
But I love watching the camera, and you're expecting something. Maybe some things do happen, and it's scary when they do, but it's almost equally scary to just be in that state of anticipation.
You're making me think of a movie now too. I can't recall the name of it, but I feel like it was set in the South in New Orleans, and it was the main premise of it was an RPGs, and as people would become characters, they would. I'm not going to do this justice, so I should probably look up the name of the movie, but basically, as they would be choosing their characters in the game, they would then become a part of the actual story. And so if they died in the game, they died in real life.
Oh, that's so... I can't think of...
Oh, man, I'm going to look this up.
The movie. Yeah, well, you look that up. I'll chat through mine. So, I mean, usually this type of year, I know we talked about Mike Flanagan at the top of the show. I mean, he has shows like Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, which is honestly one of my all-time favorites.
Don't sleep on Midnight Mass. That blew me away.
So good. But then most recently, he did a series inspired by The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. And I love Poe. So like that show felt like a love letter to Poe and to every Poe fan. So that was incredible. But some regular like must watch movies for me are going to be things like Psycho. Love some OG Hitchcock, Nightmare Before Christmas. I know people have thoughts about whether or not this is a Halloween movie or a Christmas movie. It's definitely a Halloween movie.
It's a November movie. It's the one you see when you're either coming down from Halloween or leading up to Christmas. It's an Advent movie. Can we say that?
I don't know. I'll agree to disagree on that front. Right. I mean, it has Oogie Boogie in it. Think about that character. Think about the climax of this movie. It is a Halloween movie.
I'm sorry, I can't think of Oogie Boogie and the word climax in the same sentence. That's not.
You can't. I mean, he has that sultry voice, though. How can you not?
It's kind of sultry, honestly. Yeah.
The OG Halloween as well. Again, big John Carpenter fan. I loved the original Scream.
Yeah.
Like the meta commentary on the genre is awesome. And then
that's probably the horror movie I've seen the most is
Yeah.
Scream, because when it was out, I had it on VHS at home, would watch it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when my parents were watching that at home after it came out for the first time, I was not allowed to watch it because it was rated R. And I found that odd because my parents didn't really censor a lot of what I watched. But now looking back on it, I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of see why they didn't let me watch that. Well, we're going to take a quick break here before we come back and ponder the question, are scary movies only for Halloween?
I did find out the name of the movie. It's called Stay Alive.
Stay Alive?
I need to add this to my list. Honestly, y'all, anytime you watch a good scary movie, please tell me, because I freaking love scary movies. So I will watch it. Back to my question. Do y'all think scary movies are only for Halloween?
I think there's value, like I think I said toward the top of the show, in setting aside some time to put yourself in the mindset of taking in some horror, feeling a little vulnerable, that kind of a thing. I don't know that I would seek out horror throughout the year.
I don't think scary movies are only for Halloween, but it does anger me a bit when a really good scary movie doesn't end up being slated for release around Halloween. And I know there's a lot of factors that go into that decision making, but when I see a horror movie be released in the spring or the summertime, it just doesn't land the same way. I would love to be able to go to the theater and see it around Halloween, so you get like that full vibe. I guess you could rent it or watch it online around that time if it's been out long enough, but that's kind of my thoughts there. But I think you can watch them. I mean, it may be weird to watch it around the holidays, but I think all other times are fair game.
Well, Christmas is spooky. Like that's kind of the interesting thing about Nightmare Before Christmas. Christmas, especially A Christmas Carol, it's about ghosts.
Yeah.
And I think the two holidays between Halloween and Christmas are inextricably linked. And then you have movies like Edward Scissorhands, which are spooky but set over Christmas.
What about
that's
Krampus?
a really good point. 'Cause I was actually going to ask this earlier. Given we do an entire podcast on Harry Potter, how would we classify the Harry Potter movies? Are they Halloween spooky season movies, or do they just kind of work anytime that Freeform wants to do a Harry Potter weekend?
I mean, I'm spooked by how colorless a lot of the sequels are.
No, but I mean, like, let's maybe play around with the first two movies, the
Christmas
whimsical,
movies.
Okay,
The
Christmas movies.
Yeah.
But they get darker, as we know.
Yeah.
A lot darker.
Darker. Yeah, I would think if there is a Harry Potter film that is a Halloween movie, would it be 4?
Yeah, probably. I think that has the most elements to make it feel like a Halloween movie. There's lots of creepy beasts and like a lot of unsettling mystery, kind of a whodunit.
Murder,
Yeah.
concealment, the return of Lord Voldemort, Snape pushing Harry's face into the table. Yeah. All the fixins.
So honestly, like I'm a little biased on this. I love scary movies. I love creepy stuff. I love everything creepy, macabre, unsettling, foreboding. Like I just think it's a really creative way of storytelling. And contrary to, some popular opinions of people who are not on this panel, I don't just love murder. This is something I was accused of on Millennial
I'm kind
last
of disappointed, actually.
You're like, oh man, I was looking forward to talking about murder with you. But I think the thing is, I really appreciate this medium of storytelling because again, there's a point to it. And the point is to really make us observe all of the macabre, the
The unknown.
perverseness, the backwards nature of our society, and even to confront the parts of ourselves that are scariest to us, the parts of ourselves that scare us the most. And I think that that is just a deeply intuitive and impactful form of storytelling, which is why I hold scary movies in my heart all the year. Very similar to Ebenezer Scrooge with Christmas. It's
I
just me with
promise to
scary
hold
movies.
Christmas all year round.
Yeah. I also think it's about the unknown, right, Laura?
Yeah.
It's challenging us to think in a way that, or to explore things that maybe scare us. Like, it's not just about the scare of seeing a boogeyman or a poltergeist or a very creepy child. It's like there are things that are explored through horror films that, are scary because we don't know the answer to certain things.
Yeah, I think that in some ways horror can prepare us for just an encounter with the unknown. It doesn't have to be the same encounter. It doesn't have to be a burglar breaking in, but it can be that experience of having to run or having to consider how to survive in a short time span. I think that watching horror might make us a little bit more acute in that sort of department, because if we had been totally new to a feeling or situation, that's going to slow us down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like what you said as well, Micah, about being forced to think differently. I think particularly now we find ourselves in a society where people cannot and do not handle ambiguity very well. People don't know how to operate with nebulous concepts. And they're really wanting things to be this like black and white, zeros and ones, binary, where it's like things are either good or bad. You're either evil or good. And that's not how life is. And to be honest with you, sometimes like I think that what makes horror the scariest for people is that it does challenge that mindset and forces you to accept that the world comes in many, many shades of gray.
The world isn't divided into good people and Death Eaters,
Exactly.
Laura. There's light and dark inside of all of us.
Thank you, Sirius Black. Well, we're going to wrap it up here in a couple of minutes, but I can't let us go without asking what y'all's plans are for Halloween.
Recording MuggleCast.
Oh, yeah. I guess we have to do that.
Yeah. Yes, that. But also there's a house party this weekend, which I like when you're at the age where Halloween isn't about the candy anymore, but it can still be an excuse to get together and see friends and eat candy.
I was going to say it's still about the candy.
Okay, it's still about the candy. But I'm trying to cut back on the candy. So it's less about candy for me personally this year.
Well, if you're going to go for candy, make sure you go to Andrew's house because he gives out the full-size candy bars.
Oh my God.
I've heard tell of Andrew's reputation for this. And what do you think would happen if I booked a ticket out of Vegas, didn't tell him, and I just showed up dressed up?
Oh,
like what scares Andrew the most?
Women.
Oh, well, there we go.
No, I'm sorry. I was just thinking if you revealed your mask and you're like, it's me.
Yeah.
No. I feel like he said this before and I'm not remembering.
Was it the Groucho Marx thing? Because I remember him talking about his dad having like a Groucho Marx bobblehead or something downstairs, and it used to terrify him.
I'm scared of that.
What if I turned up on Andrew's doorstep on Halloween dressed up as Groucho Marx?
That would be...
I want to say he also didn't like clowns, or maybe it was his brother. I don't remember.
Well, speaking of things that scare us, I want to get a little bit vulnerable here, and this is mainly for me so that I can keep a running catalog of how best to scare the shit out of all of you.
Thank you.
So what scares y'all the most?
For me, it's body horror. Movies have gotten really good at showing what seems to be realistic depictions of the insides of people. But I have next to no stomach for it. If somebody's wounded in a very egregious way, perfect example, Final Destination, the gory deaths and things.
Yeah.
I had to stop watching those sequels because it just got worse and worse, worse and worse, and I couldn't take it. I like being scared, but I don't like seeing people be mauled. So that gets to me.
Yeah, and honestly, if we're talking about like what are the qualities that make like good horror and like not so good horror, I really think that movies that rely entirely on gore, they tend not to be very good movies. Like I don't I mean this might be controversial, but like I was never a fan of the Saw movies for this reason. It was like, like we're just being gory and like gross and
yeah. Well, and there's a lot to be said for letting the audience do the work.
yeah.
The definition of the word obscene comes from the Greek obscen, which meant off screen or off scene, off stage. When in Oedipus, when he does the thing to himself, that would actually happen. You wouldn't see it. So the audience, whatever's happening in your imagination is going to be way worse than anything they could stage. And there's something to that has followed the tradition of horror ever since.
I just, like you're saying, Eric, I can't stomach those types of movies. They don't do anything for me.
No.
I'd prefer to watch a movie where you're trying to figure out who done it, or you're constantly guessing. And I just feel like if you're going to go and watch people get carved up for 90 minutes to 2 hours, to me that's not horror, that's just gore.
I agree.
That said, there are movies that are excessively gory that aren't taking themselves seriously. John Carpenter's The King has all these John Carpenter's The Thing has these creature effects that are absolutely worth seeing. They're terrifying and they're full scale, absolutely insane creature effects. But yes, they're gory. Like things are spewing things you're not supposed to see. I think there's a movie with Sam Neill in it. I want to say Sam Neill in it called Parasite. I almost want to say, I think it's Australian like him. I'm trying to find it. But Possession from 1981. That one also very gory, but in a style where it's like, ooh, like you wouldn't want to come across. If you open the door and you see this, you're like, oh God, and close the door again. Safely. There's a place for it, but not the kind of, where good people are being tortured due to the whims of somebody else. This is too close. It's too terrifying for me.
And that's fair enough. I feel that way too, Eric. But Micah, I know we heard about your distaste for clowns. What's the other thing?
Don't have it as much as an adult, but there are probably moments where clowns will still get to me. But creepy kids.
Yeah.
Laura, you're talking about The Sixth Sense earlier. There's just something that is so bone chilling when you have a kid in a horror movie say a line a certain way or like start to behave very strangely, and that gets to me. That will do me in when I'm watching a horror movie.
Yeah. I see dead people.
It does go back to that. I mean, there was a whole decade where you couldn't see a horror movie without there being a creepy kid in it. For me, it's Dolls too. Annabelle.
Dolls.
Oh yeah.
I have to send you some photos from one of the castles in Scotland when you talk about dolls.
Please don't. God, what was that movie? There's a movie where it's a horror movie and I've seen it. There's The Boy. I think it's called The Boy.
Oh yeah. I haven't
She's a
actually
caretaker.
seen that.
Yeah, she's a caretaker. She's invited to be a caretaker for a boy. His parents go away, leaving her in the house. The boy is their deceased son that is manifesting in the form of, like, they introduce her to him and it's like a porcelain doll, and she's like, easy job watching this porcelain doll because the parents have grief they can't get over. but then it like starts to move and talk to her and do this crazy stuff. So The Boy is absolutely worth it. Also, while we're in this company, I'll recommend one more film because it has Isaac Hempstead Wright in it from Game of Thrones, who plays Bran Stark, and Imelda Staunton.
What a combo.
Both in a movie from 2011 called The Awakening. And that is, you should actually check that out. It's not gory. It's a good spooky story.
Supernatural?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm always
the lead is Rebecca Hall, who was also just in that movie, The Night House, that I recommended.
I just sent you both the picture of the doll.
Oh gosh. Well, I feel like I have to look at that.
I asked you not to do that
on air.
Yeah. Oh.
That is nightmare fuel.
It honestly looks like a cherub door knocker from the Muppet Christmas Carol, but okay.
Hang on.
If that's what's going to make you sleep tonight, Eric, then
I know. Making fun of it is absolutely. You're right. You absolutely spotted my attempt to.
I hate that.
Why is it looking at me?
Did you, when you went to bed that night, Micah? When you closed your eyes, did you always see that doll?
No.
You didn't see it because it was right behind you.
No, there you go. I'm trying to see if there's any others in here, but we were told like there's one specific doll in this castle as we were going through, and there were a few, but you can understand in some cases, like this was back hundreds of years ago. There's only so much they can do in the way of designing dolls, but that one is creepy as hell.
Well, and that's kind of my question with ancient dolls is like, how did this ever bring comfort to a child?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we could then have a whole conversation about the world those children lived in and how the standards might have been different for what was comforting back then. But honestly, I've had so much fun with this discussion today. I so appreciate both of you being here. And hey, I would be happy to talk about more scary movies on a future episode. So if y'all want to, listeners, please let us know about your feedback.
Are you saying we need to do a sequel?
Yeah. Bring back Vincent Price. Well, thank you so much for listening with us today. We are a new show, so we do need your support. First of all, please follow us in your podcast app and leave a review. This is going to help make the show a success. Please also be sure that you follow us on YouTube. We are What the Hype Podcast there. And we would love it if in the comments for this video, you tell us which scary movie is your favorite. Next, please also follow us on our other social media. So we are also on TikTok, Twitch, and Instagram as What the Hype Podcast. Our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. On X, we are What the Hype Show. And if you want to email us about anything, do that at whatthehypepodcast@gmail.com. But please, no creepy chain letters.
Oh,
In name of the season, no creepy chain letters about how if I don't send this to 10 of my closest friends, a demon child is going to appear by my bedside and kill me tonight.
Well, we could say to our listeners, if you don't share this podcast with at least 5 people, we'll let them off the hook.
Oh, that's actually a great idea. Let's start our own chain letter. And actually, this could be really helpful because if a friend or family member needs convincing about why scary movies are so important to watch and so ingrained in our culture, you can send them that threatening chain letter. Please feel free to share that episode with a family member or a friend and let them know that we are walking through every aspect of pop culture each week. And that is the hype on scary movies for Halloween, y'all. Bye, everyone, and have an amazing rest of the spooky season.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye forever.